Hi, this is Goch. Welcome to the Doorway to the World. Today's doorway is a brief history of Christianity, episode 6. The Christianity among ordinary people in Middle Age Europe. Well, the conversion and spread of Christianity in Europe was clearly seen among kings, nobilities, ruling classes, and wealthy people. But how about the ordinary people? You see, those ordinary people are descendants of Germanic tribes. Germanic tribes were the pagans. They weren't Christians. So those people carried much of their beliefs, pagan beliefs, into their lifestyles for many, many years. You see, they were embedded in the culture, everyday lives, because they are passed down from generation to generations. So it was hard for them to change their beliefs into this newly arrived Christianity. So, but the thing is, if you look at around you in Europe, the Christianity has been one of the main dominant religion among ordinary people. So, question is, how did it happen? Let's have a look. To do that, let's have a look at the beginning. Well, during the Roman time, this Roman civilization consumed much of the European forest, made European continent bare. Some suggested that the Roman civilization ended because of this overconsumption of the forest and resources. So, all the trees are gone in Europe during the Roman time. But since the fall of the Roman Empire, for next 500 years, this European forest came back, regenerated, and spread it all over the Europe again. Europe was covered by this forest, thick forest, where trees are so thick that even in the daytime you won't see any sunlight on the ground. That's why it's called Dark Age. Well, during this period, people are living in much of the fear. Remember, since the Roman Empire is gone, Roman civilization is gone, people there lost the technology and the wealth and even the knowledges of this once great civilization, and their lives became much more primitive, close to the primitive state. And also there were many dangers in this dark forest of Europe. Many people are fighting against each other, all those factions and kingdoms, and there are constant the threat of war. And also in those dark places, there are the great places for the robbers and bandits. So people are very scared there. And people rarely traveled. And also there are the natural dangers such as wolves and bears in European forest. And even worse, they had series of plagues during this period, killing the people. And even worse, they had a mini ice age, the climate change, and that contributed to the decline of the population in Europe. See, the danger and threat of the war, the bandits, the natural dangers, the climate change, the plagues, all those things made the population to decline. And as the population declined, the people's their life standard went down and down and down because productivity went down. And once that the thriving Roman cities, they became ruined as well. The only handful of people, like kings, maybe their retainers, nobles, and bishops and priests appointed by Rome, they lived there. Some estimated probably about around 100 and 200 people at the most lived there. So those are truly the Dark Age in Europe. But that began to change in around about 10th century. And what happened? We're going to have a look. And this is what happened. The agricultural development. Well, in the history of Europe, there are two major developments occurred that changed people's lives. One is this agricultural development, and another one was the Industrial Revolution in 18th and 19th century. And there are three major factors contributed to this agricultural development in the medieval Europe, Middle Age Europe. One is a feudal system. Well, what is a feudal system? Well, explaining in a nutshell. Simply, it is the relationship between a king and his subject based on the contract. What is contract? Well, king needed fighting men, such as knights. And to hire the knights, he offered the piece of land for them to own. In return, the knights that kind of offers their fighting skills. They go to war for the king. So basically that's what feudal system is. And in this system, the kings, they need land to distribute to people. So that's why they try to acquire more land and land. Remember, in Middle Age Europe, the land was one of the main commodity. It was very important for the people. Why? Because land produces food and wealth. That's why the land was very important. And king needed land, not like desolate land or like those things, but they needed good, fertile farmland. So they started cutting the forest, cutting down the trees, cutting down the woods, expanded the agricultural land, the farmland. Well, all those farmlands, of course, needed people to work on. Therefore, there was emergence of the farm workers, peasants, the slaves, and some people that hired the land from the landlords and kings to work on and then pay the tax in return. That called serfdom. And those things appeared, and that actually led to the very clear distinction, much clearer distinction of classes in the society. You know, there are main three distinctive classes in Europe, which is the nobilities, the lords of the land, and those people who fight for them. There are farmers and peasants, the laborers, and there are churches, the spiritual authorities. Those classes became much more distinctive around this time. So that's one of the major factor for the development of agriculture in Middle Age Europe. The second one, it came from a Christian society. Well, what happened was about 1098, in France, the small group of Benedictine monks kind of branched out from mainstream and started a new order called Cistercian monks. You see, Benedictine monks, they believed their lives were dedicated to God. So they separated themselves from society, lived in isolation, away from those influences of the world, and dedicated themselves in prayer and study of scriptures and service to God. But these Cistercian monks came out from there. They believed the original teaching, the beliefs of Saint Benedict when he started this monastery, the monastic order. And Cistercian monks believed in the importance of manual labor, and especially in agriculture, and to service to the people, the charity. So those branched out Cistercian monks, they went to live among people, and they began to pass on the knowledge of agriculture, the new way of the farming, and taught people how to expand their farming. skills, the farming cultures. And they encouraged people to cut down the trees to enlarge their farmland. And some of the study actually suggest in France, around that time, or before that time, about 70% of French land was covered by forest, but after this, agricultural development only covered by 20%. You see, that was the extent of this development. And those monks, the Cistercian monks, they contributed that, encouraged people to enlarge the farmland. The third factor was the technological development. There are two major things invented around that time. One was horseshoes and horse collars. Horseshoes, they protect the horse's hooves. They are very delicate. When they injured it, an infected horse died. But these horseshoes protected their hooves from this damp clay soil of Northern Europe. So people began to use horses more. Now, of course, the horse collar, which pulls those plows and stuff from horses' shoulder instead of from their necks or windpipes, that created much more power, increased power, horsepower, so that the work became much more efficient. So people began to use more horses than oxes. Another invention that the development was the water mills and windmills. Up until then, the people used the animal to generate power for the millstones to rotate, or even done by the people's hand. But now, when they began to use the water and wind powers, the actual productivity increased, efficiency increased. So those things contributed to agricultural development. Three factors: feudal system, the monks, and technological development. And this agricultural development contributed to the major change in society. What happened? Well, this development brought the increase of productivity. That's a big thing, because this increase of productivity, generating more food, actually led to the increase of population. Why? Because there are more food, the less people die of starvation. Yes. And so population increased. Some studies suggest that between year 1000 to 1350, this 350 years period, the population of Europe doubled. It was that extent of increase happened because of this agricultural development. And this increased population enabled some people to become the non-agricultural workers. Some people found their jobs other than being farmers, such as the blacksmith to make plows and farm equipment, and the craftsmen, the masons to build the mills and stuff. Of course, there are the mills, there are millers to process the food, and those processed food need to be carried to other places and sold, the merchants and tradesmen, etc. Those new occupation developed around that time. You know, have you had like stonemasons and some kind of guilds, the merchants guild and, you know, blacksmiths guild and masons, those things developed, those groups of occupations developed around that time too. And this increased population diversity of society with development of processing industry like mills and the trading market led overflowing population from small village and small settlement into bigger places, bigger settlements, like those bigger settlements, cities and towns along the trade route, by the rivers and ancient city of Rome, that where the kings, nobilities, and bishops and priests were. People began to flowing into those places, and also some of the small settlement just expanded, just grew, and the local church parish that benefited from this expansion of population, that they were able to collect more tithes from people and peasants, the farmers. And these expanding settlements began to be known as cities. So agricultural development brought urbanization. This urbanization brought the birth of cities. During this period, the urbanization, the Middle Age, Europe was going on, the church played significant role in this. See, bishops and priests who were appointed or sent by the Rome to their parishes, they built cathedrals bang in the middle of the city. And it became the major focal point of this development of cities and towns. You see, when you go to all those European cities on your holiday, you always find big cathedral in the middle of the city. This is why. And this particular move of building cathedrals in cities actually contributed the Christianity to come to much closer to the ordinary people's lives. Before 11th century, not many people and not many towns had churches and cathedrals. Ordinary people did not have a regular or easy access to the Christianity at the time. Main churches were in the cities, reconfigured ex-Roman cities, where the kings, nobilities, and priests were. But ordinary people living in the forest or farmland, they didn't have much of access to those churches. Occasionally monks from the monasteries came to preach and perform certain rituals, like Christian burials and stuff. But the people lived there were still closely related to their pagan customs, which were handed down by generations. But since the 10th century onwards, this urbanization of Europe and the birth of cities triggered by the agricultural development contributed to the spread of Christianity among ordinary people, as the church became much closer to people's everyday lives. So, agricultural development led to urbanization. Urbanization led church and Christianity to came much closer to people's lives. There's one more important thing happened during this Middle Age Europe for the spread of Christianity among ordinary people. That happened in the 14th century. The event was called the Plague, the Black Death. This Black Death came from the east and killed and wiped out about a third of the European population. 1 in 3 people died. And it took next 150 years for the European population to recover. It was that devastating. People could not find the cause of this plague. People are saying, why is this happening? Of course, we know how it happened when the virus, the plague, was carried by the fleas on the mice that came from east. But they didn't know that time. They believed that was the punishment, the plague was a punishment from God for their sinful way of lives. And also they saw that at the end of the world. In that kind of devastating, the fearful, horrible time, the people trying to find someone to blame. So they began to persecuting the minority in the societies, such as Jews. And many Jewish people in Europe were killed at that time. You see, this apocalyptic atmosphere in the society actually caused people to rush to God and church, seeking salvation of their souls. That fear drove people to God. Problem was, this plague didn't choose the people to kill. It also killed priests as well. And God works mysterious way, really. Even the bad situation, God brings something good. After the plague, it's kind of settled because of the shortage of the priest. The society began to develop the new schools and college for the priests to teach people to become priests. So the theological colleges and schools developed after this. Also, the bad things happened as well because of this apocalyptic, the end of the world-ish kind of atmosphere. People in the devastation, that counterfeit beliefs in religion appears. Such as that flagellant. People called the flagellant, they whip themselves, believing that the hurting themselves might bring God's mercy onto their souls. Those things happen very chaotic, the sad time. But through this, people came to know the God, came to the church, and Christianity spread rapidly and made a foundation to become the major dominant religion of Europe as we know now. So, such was the Christianity among ordinary people in medieval Europe, the Middle Age Europe. Well, in next episode, we're gonna going back to Roman Catholic Church and what happened towards the later Middle Age period. Well, until then, God bless. Goodbye.